And welcome into the State of Purple in the State of Purple podcast. I'm AJ Mansour. He's Jack Day, and we are brought to you by SotaStick and SotaStick.com. Head over to SotaStick.com right now and get your Minnesota sports-inspired goods, specifically those nice little purple ones that you can see at the bottom of the screen here, maybe that hat that Jack is rocking today, and use the promo code KFAN. You'll save yourself 15% off your order at SotaStick.com with that promo code KFAN. Jack Day. Week 1 is in the books. The Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings squared off, and we had some questions answered. Final score 23-7 in favor of the Minnesota Vikings. That's a good thing. How did you take in the game? What do you think? What were your initial thoughts of what we saw? We've been waiting so long to see what this team would look like. They looked pretty stinking good.
Yeah, I was impressed, and I think I had high expectations for this team, but a little bit of that was I proceeded with caution because it is a new coaching staff, and you just said that.
Hang on. I'm going to stop you real quick. A little bit of that is proceeded with caution because we're Minnesota sports fans.
Also very true. I think
have the optimism.
There was a little bit inside of me when it was 23-7 in the fourth quarter, like, oh, buckle up. Here we go again. But it didn't happen. And I just want to give kudos to the entire team, the new regime, because it didn't feel like this was a team that missed any time throughout the preseason. None of the starters played. They were flying around, and they were the harder hitting team, which surprised the hell out of me because we were raving about the Packers defense last week, talking about how good they should be and how good I think that unit is, probably a top 5 unit in the NFL. And the Vikings offense, in particular, Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson, made them look like they were shredded cheese, like the SotaStick shirts that they printed last week. But it was entertaining, and I think we have some questions that did get answered. I'm still a little bit hesitant to fully jump on board because I do think this is going to be a tough task to go into Philadelphia next week on Monday Night Football. But Vikings fans should enjoy it because it was a divisional game week 1, and at the end of the day, the new coaching staff, the new regime, they answered a lot of questions and they performed very well, in my opinion.
Right. Considering the way that it could have gone, we should all feel good, right? I mean, it could have been a disaster with a brand new head coach. It could have been a disaster with no preseason reps. It could have been a disaster with Aaron Rodgers on the other side. That's what we're used to seeing with these Minnesota Vikings teams, but it felt different yesterday, Jack. And I think that, some of the things and the questions we had, the hopes that we had, maybe even I'll put it that way, the things we had hoped would have transitioned with new coaching staff, with new defensive style, with new players, with new mentality, for the most part, they totally did. We went into this season asking, hey, how is Kevin O'Connell going to transition to being a head coach? How is he going to bring what he had in LA to Minnesota? Will it work with Kirk? Will it work with Dalvin, Jefferson, all these things? We didn't know because they didn't play in the preseason. Same thing on the defensive side. Can we switch to 3-4? How's Danielle Hunter going to look to 3-4? Is Zadarius Smith healthy? All these questions that we had going into the season, at least through 1 week, were answered, and they were pretty much answered favorably. The defense, our defense, Minnesota Vikings defense looked great. They, clearly there were some differences on the Green Bay offense. They were down a couple guys on the offensive line. They were missing Devontae Adams. Aaron Rodgers did not have the arsenal he is used to having, but at the same time, he's still Aaron Rodgers. The Green Bay defense is still good, and both facets of the ball, faces of the ball, were just going crazy. Everything clicked for the Minnesota Vikings, special teams, offense, and defense. It was pretty much an all-around win. I don't know. There's some things that we still need to see, and we need to see get better, but nothing that left me super concerned coming out of week 1. Am I crazy in thinking that?
I don't think so. And I want to bounce this back to you. Did you just say that Aaron Rodgers, MVP winning quarterback, that he needs help to win football games? Is that what you're saying?
Well, don't ask him because he won't answer that and think that he needs help. Back-to-back MVP, by the way. Let's not shortchange him. But seeing him cry like a baby on the sideline, seeing him pout in his press conference and not want to talk about Zadarius Smith, how good did all of that feel?
It was awesome. And we can flip back to the Vikings side too, kind of bouncing off what you just said. Adam Thielen, they interviewed him after the game, and I don't remember who tweeted this out, so excuse me for forgetting, but Thielen essentially said, I've never been a part of an offense like this where it was attack, attack, attack. And I think that is the whole change in philosophy. This is going to be an offensive football team, which is very weird to say that out loud with the Mike Zimmer era now in the past. But Adam Thielen was only a part of that Mike Zimmer led team. So that's all he's familiar with. And this is a change in culture. I mean, we've been hearing this all throughout the offseason, the word collaboration, culture, all of that. And it came to fruition on yesterday. But the most exciting thing for me was just watching the different ways they utilized Justin Jefferson. They had the run game going. It wasn't, I think Delvin was somewhere in the 90s, if I'm remembering correctly, in terms of rushing yards. So he wasn't, it was like 4.5 yards per carry as well. So he wasn't playing bad, but they were going with the hot hand, and that was Justin Jefferson. I mean, there were situations where Justin Jefferson, we've said this on the show, we think he is probably the best receiver in football right now. And there were plays where he didn't have defenders within 15 yards of him. And I don't know how that happens. You can be the best wide receiver in football. That shouldn't happen. What that comes back to is Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips scheming him into that. And I believe there was more plays than what he traditionally ran in years past, where they were moving him around in motion and putting him in better situations. We know how good Jair Alexander is. And to get Justin Jefferson off of that matchup, it only creates mismatches. And we're going to see that throughout the rest of this season, where this new offensive scheme, they are going to try their best to attack the weaknesses of opposing teams' defenses.
For those of you streaming this, you can see that I'm recording outside today. And I've literally got a garbage truck going back and forth in front of my house right now. I have no idea what's going on. I apologize for the noise, but they're just going back and forth right in front of my house. So here's the scoop, okay? Minnesota Vikings, you mentioned Justin Jefferson. An interesting quote that came out of the game from Kevin O'Connell in the post-game with KFAN was kind of what we had hoped and what we had wondered about what was going to come over from LA, that Cooper Kupp role. And he very plainly said, we are going to move Justin Jefferson all over the field. We're going to put him inside, we're going to put him outside, left side, right side, back of the field, put him in motion, do all these things in an effort to not allow the opponent to kind of know where he is. If they don't know where he is, they can't double team him, I think was the exact quote that he said. And we saw the benefit of that. He was moving in and out. I mean, there was some lapses in defense. Again, a good Green Bay Packer defense. That's what we need to not forget, is it was full-fledged domination for the Minnesota Vikings against one of what we think is going to be the best defenses in the league. Vastly improved from Green Bay Packers defenses of yesteryear, and definitely a weird situation where the defense might be the one to carry this team as opposed to the offense we're so used to seeing with Aaron Rodgers. But when they move Justin Jefferson around, they're able to have different matchups. It wasn't just Jair Alexander on him. Frankly, they didn't get to see him a whole lot. They were able to get him in different spots, and he's so versatile. Not every wide receiver can do that. You have the size, you have the speed, you have the route running ability to move wherever they want. That's a weapon that we're going to see. And in Justin Jefferson's quest for 2,000 yards, Jack, I mean, it's ridiculous, but he's on pace for more than 3,000 right now.
Yeah, and he was the star of the show yesterday, and rightfully so. But I don't think we can talk about Justin Jefferson's performance without giving some credit to Kirk Cousins, because right. Kirk Cousins looked like a different quarterback in the pocket yesterday. We talked about this last week, talking about the Packers. That front seven that they roll out, it's nasty. They have some good playmakers all over that defense. And Kirk Cousins, there were some moments of pressure. The PFF grades came out. The pass blocking wasn't great. Brian O'Neill was, I think, the best pass blocker. But the offensive line, it was solid. And when Kirk Cousins needed to step up, there was one where he hit Justin Jefferson running across the field, where he kind of stepped up in the pocket and left his feet and just slung it down the field. It wasn't the prettiest throw, but he got it to his playmaker. And that is what we were calling for at the beginning of the season. This team is littered with playmakers, and if Kirk Cousins can do a good job, I'm not going to say necessarily did the greatest job spreading the wealth around yesterday, because it was JJ's show, but we know what this team has at the wide receiver position, the running back position, right. And if they do decide to cue in on one of those players, if it does turn into Justin Jefferson, we know that Adam Thielen can take that weight and that pressure off of Justin Jefferson, and we know Kirk Cousins loves going to him in the red zone. So Kirk Cousins, he was the second highest graded Viking on offense according to PFF, right behind Justin Jefferson, who was like 91 point something, if I'm remembering correctly.
kind of tough to beat 184 and 2, and we were talking about ratings. But Kirk Cousins, 23 for 32, 277, and 2 touchdowns. But it felt pretty quiet, right? I mean, it was very efficient. It wasn't super dynamic. Outside of a couple Justin Jefferson deep plays, it was just an efficient offensive performance. And that's exactly what you would think of with Kirk Cousins, right? He has the ability to be that upper echelon, high end quarterback. But if you can keep him in this window, right, you can give him the time to sit back there. He had plenty of time most of the afternoon to kind of look over and see what was going on, and just kind of happened to find Justin Jefferson more than Adam Thielen. And it wasn't as if Adam played a poor game. There were just opportunities for Justin Jefferson that were so wide open, you couldn't not throw the football to Justin Jefferson. So to see that there was encouraging. The run game felt pretty quiet too. I mean, until later in the game, Alexander Madison was getting some stretch. Dalvin Cook, as you mentioned, I think he ended with 90 yards, more than 100 all-purpose yards. But that is what they want in this offense. There's so many weapons out there. You're going to rely on somebody different each week. And this week, it just happened to be Justin Jefferson. I mentioned, Jack, the protection that Kirk got. You talked about some of the ratings. Mainly, we had some big concerns on the interior of this offensive line. I didn't necessarily feel those concerns in week number 1. What did you see when you were watching the game? I noticed very plainly that Kirk had a lot more time?
Yeah, there were some situations where Kenny Clark got past Garrett Bradbury, but that's a mismatch waiting to happen. We talked about that going into the week. And at the end of the day, if he can block him for 2-3 seconds, the way Kirk was getting rid of the ball yesterday, I think this team is going to be okay. And on top of that, Ed Ingram finished with a 79.3 PFF grade. And that's the right guard position. You heard me correctly. We're talking about the right guard position being graded out highly on the Minnesota Vikings. So round of applause for the offensive line. Not going to say it's my specialty, but it's starting to seem like that unit is coming together, with the question mark being right in the interior with Garrett Bradbury. But you know what we have with the 2 tackles. If Christian Darrisaw does make that leap, Ezra Cleveland, I don't know if you saw the video circulating where he was this is one of my favorite things to see out of offensive linemen. When Ezra Cleveland was in pass pro and he was looking around, and sometimes you see offensive linemen where they're just kind of standing there clueless. He didn't do that. There was, I don't remember who the player was, but someone was rushing around Darrisaw and he tried to cut back inside, and Ezra went backwards upfield and absolutely pancaked him. And I love seeing that. So you have to give kudos to the offensive line. The offensive line gave Kirk Cousins more time than I think he's used to seeing, which at the end of the day led to him being a much more efficient passer.
You mentioned the word pancake. Ezra Cleveland in your example there. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball. The highlight on defense for this team had to be Zadarius Smith yesterday. There were a lot of good things that were happening, but the impact that Zadarius Smith brought to the table, pressuring the quarterback, pancaking A.J. Dillon, sacking Aaron Rodgers, even the little smirk when Rodgers tried to block him, the impact that Smith brought to the table specifically. And he wasn't the only one, right? There was sacks all around. I think he got sacked 4 times. Danielle Hunter got one. Harrison Smith got an interception. Eric Kendricks with some big pass defenses. There was a lot going on. Am I wrong in thinking that Zadarius Smith was the one that stood out the most on the defensive side of the football?
I don't think so. And I think that's the easy choice to make when it was the former Green Bay Packer coming over. I will say this, it feels a lot better watching him do that army crawl in purple. It's a lot better watching it in purple than watching him from across the sideline. But a couple other players, you said Harrison Smith had that big takeaway. He was the highest graded player on the defensive side of the ball. Some were calling for him to kind of take that step back that everyone's saying Thielen is going to take because he's in his 30s. It doesn't look like it, and I think he's going to flourish in this defense, because if this defense can stay healthy, Zadarius Smith, Danielle Hunter, we saw 2 of the other top 5 highest graded PFF players on the defensive side of the ball. Your choice last week for MVP on defense, Harrison Phillips and Delvin Tomlinson. If you can get that interior push with the edge guys that the Vikings have, it's going to be a fun season, I think, and it's going to create more turnover options. I shouldn't say turnover options, more turnover opportunities for a guy like Harrison Smith, because if they can get pressure with 4 or 5 guys, they're not going to have to bring Harrison Smith up in the box. And I think at the end of the day, Harrison Smith probably wants to be up in the box as much as possible because he likes hitting guys. but both him and Cam Bynum were also in the top 5. And I'm saying that ends the list right there. I think I just named all 5 of them, but Cam Bynum played well. And one other guy that I wanted to mention, Jordan Hicks, was all over the field. You mentioned Eric Kendricks. He had a nice pass breakup. Jordan Hicks had a sack. He forced a fumble that Delvin Tomlinson recovered, led the team in tackles. That's also going to be a fun duo. I wouldn't say it was a question mark for me heading into the season because it's 2 veterans, but there were some talks when the Vikings made that switch to the 3-4. Hey, Eric Kendricks might be a little bit too small, but it looks, as we sit right now, it looks like we have 2 really good interior linebackers to kind of complement the rest of this defense. And I think that's good news for the Vikings. I think the couple things that were negative on the defensive side of the ball, Andrew Booth came out with a quad injury, and I know you were out there. I don't think he returned to the game. I'm pretty sure he was out for the remainder of the game. But Caleb Evans over Chris Boyd got the nod to come out when Cam Dantzler got hurt. Cam Dantzler is another name who you're not going to see anything crazy in the stat sheet, but Cam Dantzler was coming downfield and tackling extremely well from what I saw. And that's, in my opinion, one of the more important that's not true. Not the most important qualities in a cornerback, but when I watch cornerbacks, especially at the college level, I love seeing guys that are willing to play a little bit gritty and make those tackles, and we saw that out of Cam Dantzler yesterday.
Right, and we all have to remember, obviously, this is a very small sample size. It's 1 week against a divisional opponent that has a bunch of question marks of their own, but the fact that it went well and that it went so well, given that we hadn't seen any of the starters, that we hadn't seen what Kevin O'Connell would actually do as a head coach / play caller. It feels good. You would much rather have it this way and then have the opportunity to expand that offensive playbook, expand that defensive playbook, all those things that we will see as the season goes on, right? They're still installing, they're still scheming and adding things in. Once they get their full arsenal, I think this team, because of the aggressiveness, the new tone that has been set both on offense and defense, plus you add that in and combine that with the talent you have on both sides of the football, this really could be a good football team, and it's not a revamp reload with a new head coach or a rebuild. This is a rego. This is a team that is ready to play a division that's probably there for the taking, and an opportunity for this team to do something pretty special. Now, they will get a test this coming week, Monday night in Philadelphia. We'll talk about that later this week on Wednesday. But this was a good start to a season where we had a lot of question marks. On offense, let's go back to the offensive side of the football real quick. You mentioned that you had some concerns on defense with the injuries there. There's clearly room to grow on both sides of the football. Were there any concerns that you had coming out of week number 1 with what you saw on offense?
I don't think so. I was just kind of sitting back and enjoying the ride, honestly, watching this offense, because it's a night and day difference from what we're seeing last year. When it's 2nd and 10, it's not a guaranteed handoff, which I think is a lot more entertaining to watch. And you can just see that Kevin O'Connell is making it a focal point to set Kirk Cousins up for success. He's not going to make him go out there and do things that he's uncomfortable with. And one thing that I want to talk about and touch on was, it's not even related to the game, but that you've probably seen it. I think you have it up on KFAN socials already as well. But the speech that Kirk Cousins gave, I know it was short, but to go up in front of his team, give out 2 game balls to 2 guys, it's the right thing to do. It was a cool moment to see both Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell get their game balls, especially when it is a captain of this football team who has, for some reason, had this narrative thrown out that he's not a good leader. And just go watch the video and tell me that with a straight face.
Well, and it feels like he was muzzled before, and now he's not, right? There's a pressure, there's a lot to be said about Mike Zimmer and the tension that he just brought to a room because of the way that he reacted and acted. And towards the end of his tenure here, that really was pretty noticeable, right? I'll never look at that little fisticuff on the sideline between Kirk and Mike Zimmer the same way ever again, now that we know what we know, right? This legit could have been a fight between a starting quarterback and a head coach on the sideline based on the animosity that we're learning about, and that does not exist right now, right? Still definitely honeymoon phase with everybody. There will be adversity, could come as early as next week. This will be the first opportunity now that a team will have tape to scheme against this Kevin O'Connell offense, to scheme against this Ed Donatel defense. We'll be able to see what adjustments this team can make, what things they can add to the fold, and what they'll do when a team has some tape on them. But given the fact that this was a good team we're playing, right? They went, I guess I shouldn't say into the game, but most of the week, Green Bay was favored. They were favored in this game. The betting lines were in favor of Green Bay. I think it shifted on game day because of some of those injuries. But at the end of the day, this is not a terrible football team that they went out and dominated, and they went out and dominated them. Greg Joseph, rock solid. Our plus size punter, as they like to call him, rock solid. I mean, every facet of this football game for the Minnesota Vikings seemed as if it was a well-oiled machine and not as if they hadn't played all preseason. That's a good thing, given the fact that, Jack, they didn't play all preseason.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought the special teams up. As much as I hate talking about special teams, as much as probably 95% of the people that live in the state of Minnesota hate talking about special teams, Greg Joseph was 3 for 3 with his career long. I believe it was 56 yards. And you mentioned the punting situation. It was solid. He had, I believe, 3 inside the 20 where he pinned them back. Field position is critical. That was another battle that it just didn't seem like the Vikings won all too frequently last year. And let's say this too, within the last 2 minutes of the first half and the last 2 minutes of the second half, the Packers didn't score points. And I think that's another huge talking point. And I know this is going to kind of go under the radar because there was a lot of people on both sides of this trade that either hated it or were okay with it. But Jalen Reagor handled the punt return duties admirably. I know there wasn't anything crazy that he did, but he didn't muff any punts. So special teams, offense, defense, everything kind of synced together. And I don't remember the last time we've been able to have that conversation, if I'm being honest. It always felt like, especially within the Kirk Cousins era, it always felt like the offense had a good game, the defense struggled, or vice versa. That was not the case in this game. All 3 phases of the game were in sync. And at the end of the day, it turned out the Vikings had the second highest graded team grade, according to PFF, just behind the Kansas City Chiefs and just in front of the Buffalo Bills, who absolutely took it to the Rams on Thursday night. So it's promising. We can't just look at the PFF numbers, but when they match up with the win and kind of the eye test as well, I think it's fair to look at.
Well, and let's say this too, like there were 2 or 3 times on that punt rush where they were very close to blocking a kick. And I don't know if that was simply the situation with Green Bay, or if this is going to be something we're going to see all season long, where they're a little more aggressive. They're going to get in there, try and block those punts. And based off of what we saw in week number 1, I think they're going to get 1 or 2 this season. So it is just a turning of a page, a breath of fresh air on all 3 phases of football. And it felt great. It felt really good. It felt good to do it against a divisional opponent. It felt good to do it against Aaron Rodgers. You now are in the driver's seat, right? I know it's Chicago you're tied with, but I don't feel like people are taking Chicago fully seriously yet, and nor should they, based on the way that game went down. The fact that you can get up a game on Green Bay, game and a half, whatever you want to call it, with the tiebreaker situation, is a great thing to do on week number 1. You have generally speaking, a softer front end of this schedule, minus this next game, right? This Philadelphia game is going to be a tough one. High hopes for Philadelphia. You go on the road, nationally televised primetime game. Kirk Cousins, there's been this narrative that he struggles with that. We'll see what the new Kirk does. The leader Kirk, the Kirk that doesn't have anybody on top of him, the Kirk that is not being held back in the huddle and able to do. Maybe it's a whole different person. Maybe this is just the beginning. I know that's what a lot of people are hoping for, but Jack, this is it. It was a week number 1. I don't know how he could have scripted it any better. It left you with a good taste in your mouth. It left you with more room to grow. It left you with nothing that you're super concerned about, and that's really all you can ask from with week number 1.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling, to be honest with you too. I'm not used to that. I feel like these episodes last year just got to a point where we were repeating ourselves, talking about the same old Vikings. And now, like, I think you worded that perfectly. It's a breath of fresh air, and it's what the state and what this team needed. And I know it's just one game, and I'm right there. I've been saying this the entire offseason that I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit. It is a first-year head coaching staff, or a first-year coaching staff that Kevin O'Connell brought with him for the most part. But at the end of the day, everything went smoothly, and I really don't have any complaints on my end, where I know the team is going to do their due diligence this week, and they're going to watch film, and they're going to have things that they need to clean up. But you can't ask for a better start to the season against Aaron Rodgers, against the Green Bay Packers. Like you said, it's with the tiebreaker, up a game and a half already. in what I think the majority of the analysts are calling a pretty favorable division, where they were predicting it to be the Minnesota Vikings or the Green Bay Packers to come out of this division. I will say my favorite thing that I saw, this is kind of shifting off of the Vikings for a couple of seconds, but my favorite thing that I saw all weekend, not sure if you saw this clip or not, but it was in Chicago. And when Justin Fields, when they won that game and he slid into the end zone, I don't know if you've seen the picture or not, but that's entertaining. I love seeing that. I talked about Justin Fields last year now. I'm all messed up on my timing, but I'm a Justin Fields fan. I can't cheer for him now that he's down in Chicago, but it was fun kind of seeing him get a win and celebrate that way in the pouring rain and the way that football is meant to be played.
Right. At the end of the day, it's a kid's game, and they're having fun with it, so that was fun to see. So good stuff, Jack. We'll tie a bow on it here. A reminder for all of our friends, if you want to get any Minnesota sports-inspired goods, head over to SotaStick.com. You can see some pictures on the bottom of the stream right here if you're watching it, or you can head to SotaStick.com, and you can check them out right now. Enter the code KFAN at the checkout. You'll save 15% on your order. KFAN is the promo code at SotaStick.com. Head over there now. Jack, this is the State of Purple, and people can find this podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or wherever they get their favorite podcasts. They can also stream it on all the KFAN social media channels, and they can follow the great Jack Day on Twitter at Jack_H_Day. For Jack, I'm AJ Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast. We will see you next week. Actually, we'll see you later this week to preview the Philadelphia Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings on Monday Night Football. We'll see you, Jack.